And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity. But I think
Princess Anne and Queen Camilla's tension has escalated behind palace walls after Princess Anne took Camilla's daughter to a private court hearing. What could have caused two of the most powerful women in Britain to clash so deeply? And how might this conflict shake the royal family's future? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this historic fight. A history that never healed. Princess Anne has always stood out as the most disciplined member of the royal family. From a young age, she carried herself with strength, focus, and a deep sense of duty. Rules mattered to her. Loyalty mattered even more. She believed that every action should reflect respect for the family and its long-standing traditions. Many admired her for this, but few truly understood how much of her strength came from a past she never fully left behind. Beneath her calm and controlled nature was a story that remained unfinished, quietly shaping how she saw the people around her. In her early years, Anne shared a close bond with Andrew Parker Bowles. Their connection was strong, filled with emotion and mutual understanding. Those within royal circles were aware of it, even if it was never formally announced. It was the kind of relationship that held promise but never found its proper ending. Time passed, but the feelings did not fade as easily. Before anything could fully grow or settle, another presence entered the picture, changing the course of everything in a quiet but lasting way. That presence was Camilla. She carried a natural charm that drew people in without effort. She understood social spaces, knew how to connect, and moved with confidence that made her hard to overlook. When Camilla and Andrew became closer, it created a shift that could not be ignored. Soon after, their marriage made everything final. What Anne once had, or could have had, was no longer hers to hold on to. Even though she never spoke openly about it, the change was clear to those who paid attention. The situation was not simply about losing someone she cared for. It carried a deeper weight. It felt like something personal had been taken and reshaped in a way she could not control. Anne did not react loudly or emotionally. Instead, she pulled inward, holding her feelings with quiet strength. But that silence did not mean peace. A quiet rivalry began to grow, one built not on open conflict, but on memory, pride, and something unresolved. It settled into the background of their lives, never loud, but always present. As the years moved forward, life continued to connect their paths in unexpected ways. Camilla later became close to King Charles III, and eventually, their marriage placed her firmly within the royal family. For many, it was seen as a natural step, but for Anne, it carried a different meaning. It felt like history repeating itself, like doors she once stood near were being opened again, but for someone else. The past returned in a new form, making it impossible to fully separate what had been from what now existed. Anne remained composed, as she always did. She fulfilled her duties without hesitation and maintained respect in every public setting. Yet behind that steady image, her feelings toward Camilla never softened into warmth. There was politeness, there was structure, but there was no closeness. Every interaction carried a quiet distance, shaped by years of unspoken understanding. It was not anger that defined their connection, but something more complex and harder to erase. Camilla, on the other hand, moved forward with her new role, building her place within the family step by step. She focused on her responsibilities and tried to maintain balance between her past and present. Still, the space between her and Anne remained. It was not something that could be easily fixed because it was built on moments that could not be changed. Both women understood this in their own way, even without saying it aloud. But as the past continued to linger, a new question began to rise. Could something so deeply buried remain hidden forever? Or would it find a way to return in a form no one expected? And if it did, who would feel its impact the most? Children of a divided legacy. As the quiet tension between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla settled into the background of royal life, it did not remain contained for long. Over time, it began to shape the lives of those around them, especially their children. What started as an unspoken distance between two women slowly spread into the next generation, creating a space where emotions were felt deeply, but rarely addressed. The younger members of the family did not create the divide, yet they found themselves living inside it, trying to understand a history that was never fully explained to them. Laura Lopes and her brother grew up in a world that was both familiar and distant at the same time. They were connected to the royal family through their mother, Yet they were not raised within its strict structure. This placed them in a difficult position. Whenever they stepped into royal spaces, they felt the weight of expectation without the comfort of belonging. They were expected to understand rules they had not grown up with, to fit into traditions that were not fully theirs, and to carry themselves in ways that often felt unfamiliar. Their presence was often compared to that of Prince William and Prince Harry, who had been raised within the royal system from birth. These comparisons were not always spoken aloud, but they were clear in the way people behaved, in the way attention was given, and in the quiet expectations placed on each of them. Laura and her brother were seen as different, and that difference created a gap that was hard to close. It was not about one moment or one event. It was something that built slowly over time, shaping how they saw themselves within the family. Family gatherings became the clearest place where this divide showed itself. What should have been simple moments of connection often turned tense without warning. Small misunderstandings grew into sharp exchanges, and simple conversations carried deeper meaning than intended. There were times when Laura found herself in direct disagreement with Charles's sons. These moments were not just about words, they were filled with frustration, shaped by years of feeling like she stood just outside a circle she was expected to step into. Anne watched all of this with careful attention. She did not involve herself in every moment, but she noticed the patterns. To her, Camilla's children often appeared resistant to the structure that defined royal life. She saw a kind of independence that, in her eyes, crossed into defiance. Discipline was something Anne valued deeply, and she believed it should be present in everyone connected to the royal family, no matter how close or distant that connection might be. What she saw in Laura and her brother did not meet that standard, and this only added to her already firm opinions. At the same time, Anne's own children chose a different path. Rather than becoming involved in the growing tension, they stepped back from it entirely. They remained polite and respectful, but they kept their distance from the unfolding friction. This decision created an even wider gap, as it removed any chance for balance or understanding between the groups. Instead of bringing the family closer, it left each side standing apart, observing rather than connecting. What could have become a united family slowly turned into something much more fragile. There were no loud conflicts that broke the surface, but beneath the calm, there was a constant sense of unease. Each person moved carefully, aware of what had been said before and what might happen next. The space between them was filled with unspoken thoughts, quiet judgments, and feelings that had no place to be expressed. But as this fragile balance held on, another question began to form. What would happen if someone decided to step beyond that distance and try to claim a place within it? Camilla's decision. Queen Camilla had spent many years learning how to balance two very different parts of her life. On one side was her past, filled with memories, family ties, and the life she once knew. On the other side was her present, shaped by royal duty, structure, and constant attention. She carried both with care, doing her best to keep them from clashing. But no matter how steady she appeared, there was always one quiet worry in her heart that refused to fade. Her children, though connected to the royal family, still stood on the outside looking in. This thought stayed with her more as time went on. It was not something loud or urgent, but something soft and constant. She noticed it during family gatherings, in small moments of silence, in the way her children stood slightly apart without meaning to. They were present, yet not fully included. They were seen, yet not fully understood. For Camilla, this was not just a passing concern. It was something deeply personal, something that touched her role not as a royal figure, but as a mother who wanted her children to feel secure and accepted. Among them, Laura Lopez weighed most heavily on her mind. Laura had grown into her own life, steady and independent, with little desire to be drawn into royal attention. She had built a world that felt safe and familiar, away from judgment and expectation. Yet, even in that space, there remained a quiet distance between her and the family her mother had joined. Camilla could see it, even when Laura chose not to speak about it. It was in the way she hesitated, the way she held back, the way she never fully stepped forward. In private moments, away from the watchful eyes of others, Camilla began to speak gently with her daughter. She encouraged her not to stay on the edge, but to take a step closer. She spoke about connection, about building relationships, and about finding a place that felt real and lasting. She did not push harshly or demand change. Instead, she spoke with care, hoping Laura would understand that this was not about duty, but about belonging. She wanted her daughter to feel that she had a place, not because of position, but because of who she was. At first, Laura was unsure. She had spent most of her life avoiding the kind of attention that came with royal involvement. The idea of stepping into that world felt uncomfortable and unfamiliar. It meant facing people who already had strong opinions, entering spaces where she did not feel fully accepted, and carrying expectations she had never chosen. For her, staying where she was felt easier. It felt safe. But over time, something began to shift. Part of her wanted to understand what she had been standing away from for so long. Slowly, she began to consider the possibility. Her decision was not sudden, and it was not made lightly. It came from a mix of feelings. There was loyalty to her mother, a desire to support her in a way she had not done before. There was also curiosity, a quiet wish to see what life inside that world truly felt like. What had always been distant now seemed just close enough to reach. In the end, she agreed, not with full confidence, but with a willingness to try. When an invitation arrived for a private family gathering at Balmoral Castle, Camilla saw it as the right moment. She made her decision calmly, but firmly. Laura would attend, not simply as someone passing through, but as someone who had a place there. Would this step truly bring the closeness Camilla had hoped for, or would it awaken tensions that had been waiting beneath the surface? A line crossed at Balmoral Castle had always carried a quiet kind of beauty. The air felt still, the routines were steady, and every movement within its walls followed a long-standing order. For Laura Lopes, arriving there felt like stepping into a world that was both welcoming and distant at the same time. Everything looked calm on the surface, yet beneath that calm was a structure she was still learning to understand. She moved carefully, observing more than speaking, trying to find her place without disturbing the balance around her. From the moment she arrived, Princess Anne was aware of her presence. Anne did not make her attention obvious, but it was always there. She watched quietly, noticing the smallest details in the way Laura carried herself, the spaces she entered, and the way she responded to those around her. Anne had always been observant, and in a place like Balmoral, where every action held meaning, nothing escaped her notice. To her, Laura was not just another guest. She was someone stepping into a space that required care, discipline, and respect. Laura tried to follow the rhythm of the household. She attended meals, walked through the gardens, and kept her interactions polite and measured. Still, there was a sense of distance she could not shake. It was in the way conversations paused when she approached, in the way she felt slightly out of place even when she was doing everything right. That quiet feeling stayed with her, growing slowly, making her more aware of every step she took and every space she entered. Then came the afternoon that would change everything. It was a quiet time of day, when most of the household had settled into their own routines. Laura found herself walking through a less familiar part of the castle. The corridors were quieter, the air slightly cooler, and the surroundings carried a sense of history that felt deeper than the rest of the estate. She did not rush. Instead, she moved slowly, guided by curiosity and a quiet desire to understand more about the place her mother had come to call home. Her feelings toward Camilla never softened into warmth. There was politeness, there was structure, but there was no closeness. Every interaction carried a quiet distance, shaped by years of unspoken understanding. As she continued, she reached a section rarely used by visitors. It was not marked in any obvious way, but it felt different. The silence there was heavier, more complete. Drawn by that feeling, she stepped forward and entered a room that was clearly private. The space was still, carefully kept, and filled with items that spoke of history and personal significance. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking it in, unaware of how quickly this single step would be noticed. It did not take long for word to reach Anne. In a place where every movement was quietly observed, nothing remained hidden for long. Anne responded without delay. She approached with the same calm control she always carried, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. When she confronted Laura, her words were measured, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. She made it clear that a line had been crossed, that certain spaces were not meant to be entered, and that those boundaries existed for a reason. Laura felt the weight of those words, but she did not retreat. The feelings she had carried for so long began to rise to the surface. She spoke with a steadiness that surprised even herself, questioning why she was being treated as though she did not belong. To her, this was not just about a room. It was about being made to feel like an outsider in a place where her own mother now lived and held a role. Her voice carried both hurt and strength, shaped by years of quiet distance. The exchange was brief, but it left a deep impression on those who witnessed it. The calm of Balmoral felt different afterward, as though something unspoken had finally come into the open. Anne remained firm, her stance unchanged. To her, this was not a small mistake. It was a direct challenge to the order she believed must always be protected. She saw it as a moment that could not be overlooked or dismissed. Would this single step be forgiven and forgotten, or would it lead to something far more serious within the walls of Balmoral? The family court. Princess Anne made a decision that changed the tone of everything that followed at Balmoral Castle. Instead of allowing the incident involving Laura Lopes to fade away quietly, she chose to escalate it into something formal. In her view, what happened could not be treated as a small misunderstanding. It needed structure, order, and accountability. This was not about emotion for her. It was about principle, and she stood firmly by it even when it made others uncomfortable. The decision surprised many within the private circle of the royal household. A formal hearing was arranged, not in public view, but within a controlled royal setting. It was not a court in the traditional sense, yet it carried the same seriousness. A small council was formed, made up of trusted individuals who understood the importance of discretion. A legal figure familiar with royal procedures was invited to oversee the process, ensuring that everything followed strict internal order. Every detail of the setting was carefully chosen to maintain control and privacy. When Queen Camilla learned of the decision, she was deeply unsettled. She did not expect the matter to reach this level. To her, it was something that should have been settled quietly within family boundaries. She tried to speak to Anne, hoping to ease the situation before it grew further. She asked for restraint and understanding, hoping to protect both her daughter and the unity of the household. But Anne did not change her position. She believed that once rules were crossed, they had to be addressed clearly, regardless of personal ties. Laura was then formally called to attend the hearing. The request itself carried weight, and she understood immediately that this was not a casual conversation. It was something structured, something serious, and something she could not avoid. As she prepared to attend, she carried a mix of emotions. There was uncertainty, a sense of pressure, and a quiet determination not to be misunderstood. She knew she would have to speak for herself in a setting where every word would matter. The hearing took place in a private room within the estate. The atmosphere was controlled but heavy, filled with a quiet tension that everyone present could feel. Those involved thus spoke carefully, choosing words that reflected both respect and caution. Testimonies were given in detail, describing what had happened during the afternoon at Balmoral. Every moment was reviewed, every action was examined, and every reaction was considered. Nothing was rushed, and nothing was overlooked. Laura defended herself with steady clarity. She explained her actions and her intentions, trying to make sense of how a simple movement through the castle had led to such a serious situation. She remained composed, even when the pressure around her grew stronger. Yet the environment itself made it clear that this was not only about her explanation. It was about something deeper that had been building long before that moment. As the hearing continued, it became more evident that the issue was not just about access to a private space. It carried layers of meaning that went beyond the surface. There were unspoken feelings in the room, shaped by history, perception, and long-standing distance between the people involved. Every question asked seemed to carry more weight than the words alone suggested. The atmosphere reflected something larger than the event itself. Camilla listened quietly, caught between concern for her daughter and the reality of the situation unfolding in front of her. She could see how serious it had become, and she understood that the outcome would affect more than just one moment in time. Anne remained firm throughout, focused on clarity and order, determined that the process should not be influenced by personal emotion. Would this formal process bring understanding and resolution, or would it deepen the divide already forming within the family? Breaking points. The aftermath of the private hearing at Balmoral Castle left a heavy silence that no one could ignore. What had begun as a controlled discussion had now turned into something far more emotional. The air around everyone involved felt different, as if something invisible had been broken and could not be repaired easily. For Laura Lopes, the experience did not end when she left the room. It followed her, pressing on her thoughts and emotions in a way she could not escape. Laura carried a deep sense of humiliation and frustration. She felt cornered, as though every direction she turned only led her back to the same place of judgment and misunderstanding. In her mind, the situation was no longer about a single incident. It had become something much larger, something that touched her identity and her place within the family. The weight of everything she had experienced began to build inside her, and she could no longer hold it in quietly. At the center of her emotions stood Queen Camilla. Laura believed her mother had placed her in a position she never fully prepared her for. In a moment of intense emotion, she confronted her directly in a private setting. The confrontation was not gentle or careful. It came out in a rush of feelings that had been building for years without release. Laura spoke about how she had always felt like she was standing at the edge of something she was never fully invited into, even when she was physically present. Her words carried pain that had been stored away for a long time. She described moments of feeling secondary, of being pulled into a world where expectations were unclear and acceptance never felt complete. She expressed how difficult it had been to navigate a space where she was connected by family, yet separated by structure and perception. Each sentence reflected a deeper layer of frustration that had grown silently over the years. Camilla listened, trying to respond, trying to explain, trying to steady the situation. But the weight of her daughter's emotions made it difficult for her to hold her composure. The reality of what she was hearing struck her deeply. For a moment, she was no longer in her public role or position. She was only a mother hearing the pain of her child. That realization overwhelmed her, breaking through her usual calm presence and leaving her visibly shaken. King Charles III, through his son, Prince William, who had been present nearby, stepped in to help calm the situation. The intention was to prevent the emotional exchange from escalating further. Words were spoken to steady the moment, to bring some sense of control back into the room, and to separate emotion from action. Yet, even with this effort, the emotional impact of what had already been said could not be undone. The atmosphere remained tense, as nothing had fully settled. Laura's emotions had reached a point where staying in the same space felt unbearable. She stood for a moment, not speaking, as if deciding what to do next. The silence around her was heavy, filled with everything that had just been expressed but not resolved. When she finally turned away, it was not only from the argument itself, but from something deeper. It was from the fragile connection that had once made her step closer to this world. The idea of belonging, which had once seemed possible, now felt distant and uncertain again, making her more aware of every step she took and every space she entered. Then came the afternoon that would change everything. It was a quiet time of day, when most of the household had settled into their own routines. Her departure carried more than physical distance. It marked an emotional withdrawal that could not be easily reversed. Camilla remained in place, still affected by what had been said. The weight of the moment lingered on her as she tried to understand how things had reached this point. The connection she had hoped to strengthen now felt strained, fragile, and uncertain. As silence settled once more, a new question began to rise. Could this broken understanding between mother and daughter ever be repaired? Or had the distance between them grown too wide to close? Silence and consequences. In the days that followed the events at Balmoral Castle, everything around the royal household settled into an unusual quiet. There were no public explanations, no signs of open disagreement, and no visible tension outside the walls. On the surface, life continued in its usual structured way, with every appearance carefully maintained and every role carried out as expected. To the outside world, nothing seemed out of place, as if everything had returned to normal without disruption. But inside the private spaces of the family, the atmosphere told a different story. The silence there was heavier, filled with thoughts that were never spoken aloud. Every person involved carried their own version of what had happened, and none of those versions fully matched. The absence of discussion did not mean resolution. Instead, it created a quiet distance that settled between them, shaping how they moved and interacted in the days that followed. Princess Anne remained steady in her position. She did not step back from her decision or question the process she had followed. In her mind, what she had done was necessary, guided by structure and principle. She continued her duties with the same discipline she always showed, keeping her focus on order and responsibility. Yet, even with her firm exterior, the events at Balmoral stayed present in the background of everything she did. At the same time, Queen Camilla withdrew into herself more than usual. The situation had taken a deeper emotional toll than she had expected. She carried the weight of what had unfolded, especially the impact it had on her daughter. In public, she remained composed, continuing her role without interruption. But in private, there was a quiet heaviness that did not leave her. The balance she had tried so hard to maintain now felt more fragile than before. Laura Lopes chose a different path. She stepped away from the closeness she had briefly tried to build within the royal environment. The distance she created was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and steady, formed through silence and space rather than confrontation. She did not seek attention or explanation. Instead, she chose to withdraw, allowing time and distance to separate her from the intensity of recent events. Within the household, the gathering at Balmoral slowly became something unspoken, making her more aware of every step she took and every space she entered. It was not referred to in conversation, and no one openly revisited its details. Yet, despite the silence, its presence remained. It lingered in the background of interactions, shaping tone and awareness without needing to be mentioned. Everyone understood its weight, even when no one acknowledged it directly. As time passed, the absence of discussion did not erase the memory. Instead, it deepened its impact. Each person involved carried it differently, but all of them were affected by it in ways that could not be easily reversed. The structure of daily life continued, but something beneath it had shifted. The sense of ease that once existed in shared spaces had been replaced by careful distance and unspoken understanding. The truth of what had happened became clearer with time, even without words being exchanged. It was no longer seen as a single moment or a single mistake. It had grown into something larger, shaped by years of history, unspoken pride, and emotional weight that had never fully been addressed. When these elements finally came together, they created a breaking point that could not be avoided or undone.